What's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome back to the Punk Rock Review podcast. In this episode, Rob and I are going to be talking all things Ramones. Man, I'm very excited to talk about this. It's a subject that I haven't covered a lot over my years in the genre, and not that I had any kind of issue with it. I just never got around to doing it. So, yeah, got a lot to talk about tonight. So, what's up, Rob? How's your day been?
Oh, day's been going good. We're over here on spring break around here, so it's been a little bit of a different kind of week. So it was fun to just have the Ramones on all weekend long and add to the fury of the weekend.
Nice, dude. Well, this weekend was my 42nd birthday, and so I want to show you a couple of things that I got just because I'm so excited about it.
Yeah.
I was in Austin. I got to see Conservative Military Image twice this week, on Friday and then on my actual birthday on Sunday in Austin. And every time I go to Austin, I usually stay at Chris Klink's house and I go record shopping. Just to they've got way more record stores there than we do down here. And honestly, they're quite a bit better, unfortunately. So I found a copy of the Murder City Devils, Empty Bottles, Broken Hearts, first press. I was so shocked when I found this that I was like literally like scratching my head, like, where did this come from? How did this show up here? And then I picked up a copy of the Suicide Machines, Destruction by Definition, on cassette, original 1996 cassette. So those are the things that I got. Yeah, dude, that thing is not cheap. I'll tell you that.
What's nice about that is that was used as a cassette too. 1996. Someone is intending to buy that, and that's going to be like their Suicide Machine thing. They're not getting it for a collection or anything.
Nope. They
awesome.
Got that. They opened it. They listened to it. I will say they took a very good care of it, which I'm very happy about because they don't pop up online for sale very often. And so when they do, oftentimes you'll see like in the notes on the sale like listing, you'll be like, oh, but the J card's got a crease on the middle because I folded it and put it in my back pocket when I was a kid. And you're like, damn, and for the price these command, I just simply can't imagine buying one like that. So I was patient and I got one. It just happened to show up on my birthday. It was cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, got a bunch of CDs and stuff. Got a bunch of vinyl in Austin, but those are the things that those were for me to keep, and those are like more rare items. I was very excited to have those. But yeah, so one bit of an announcement before we get started with Ramones. So the inaugural 31 Fest is happening. It is official. It is locked in. We got the venue. We got 4 bands confirmed. And June 1st, Saturday. We don't have a price yet. I think it'll be somewhere between $12 and $15. It might be $20 if we have 5 or more bands, but I think we're going to try to keep it at 4 bands and keep it at 15 or under. And bands that are coming and playing will be getting paid. I'm very excited. I'm going to be designing a shirt that is exclusively for this event. I'm kind of nervous, to be honest with you. I haven't done something like this in a long time. So, but I wanted to talk about it on this channel specifically with you because I'm really proud of this, man. This is like years in the making, kind of like this is stuff that I've been trying to do for a long time. And
it's all your little worlds coming together, because you do the label stuff, you've been doing the promotion, the music video, this channel, the interviews now, the history stuff. It's all coming together and to be in one place. That's so cool.
It's pretty wild, man. It is pretty wild. You're in summer vacation in June, huh?
Yeah.
Man, I wish there was a way I could get your ass down here on that day. Yeah, so it's gonna be awesome, dude. We're gonna have Poppers, Dylan Disaster and the Revelry, Generation Exit, and then a band called Dead Rabbits. Those are the 4 that are confirmed, and I'm looking to get maybe 1 or 2 more. I just haven't really. I gotta reach out to a few people. I likely not gonna happen, but I have reached out to Days and Days, and I would love if they would headline this. But I haven't heard back yet, so I probably won't. But whatever, man. This is gonna be fun nonetheless. It's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, no, it's a legit show. That's cool.
Yeah, dude, every band on it is a band that I want to see, so I'm stoked. But yeah, I'm nervous. Anyways, let's talk about the Ramones, man. So why don't you take the reins on this one and just kind of give me a little bit of an oral history on the band, like kind of tell people that aren't super familiar with them, like where'd they come from, about when, and then anything that's relevant that we can squeeze into like maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Sure. So in my opinion, and I always say this, they are the start of punk rock as we know it. Now, they are influenced by some other stuff that sounds very, very similar to them, but they're the first ones to kind of put it all together in the way that they did it, and that became like the template for everyone else. They emerge in New York in the mid 70s, actually kind of the early 70s.
I was going to say this. I think it's like 73.
Yeah. 74 is when they officially go together. I think 76 is when the first album comes out. It's right in there. And what they are is they're what's considered, they call them the blank generation. And what it was is basically like the youngest hippies, the youngest of the hippie generation. So after flower power and all that stuff is kind of worn out, it's the last of that generation. And they're in New York. And we think of New York today as like this, cool and hip kind of place. But this is like 70s New York, where what they call it, like the white flight kind of thing. Everyone has moved out of New York. So New York is kind of like this, the dump that was thought of in like the 80s and the 90s, kind of before it got cleaned up. It's like the start of that kind of New York, where it's like the suburbs, but it's like, as I said, like the party was kind of over in there. Like the cool stuff had already happened and gone.
New York in the 70s and 80s was grimy, dude. Like it was. Just go watch movies that were filmed in that part of the country.
Taxi Drivers, based off of
right,
literally this scene, that part of the country. Yeah.
Yeah. So that part of the country was grimy. It was gnarly. It was dangerous. It wasn't glamorous at all. And there was some glamour there occasionally, but it wasn't a glamorous place. It was dangerous. And there's a lot of stuff we're about to get into with this band that I was unaware of, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned a lot of stuff in the last couple of weeks, and I'm loving this show because it's helping me just get. And there's some of it I already knew, but I couldn't recall it necessarily. So when I heard it, I was like, "Oh, that's right, I forgot about that." So, but overall, man, I'm basically just getting these massive history lessons with these episodes, and I'm having a blast doing it.
It's fun going through them, and it's fun like thinking about a band like the Ramones became the archetype of so many things. So they're from specifically this place called Forest Hills in New York, which is a suburb. So in true tradition, they were the first, they're the angry suburb punk band. But even in that context, everything in New York was just kind of rough. No matter what social class you were, like you said, it was kind of rough living in New York. And as they said, they were the outcasts. Like the other ones were kind of the college guys and that kind of stuff. And these were sort of the first of the no future sort of generation. That really wasn't a thing that existed until they really talked about it. But with that said, they are in New York, close to a very vibrant like art scene.
Right.
So there's a lot of art, there's a lot of music going on, and the members of the Ramones really grow up on like the Beach Boys, your boy Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, the Beatles, all that stuff. They really grew up on classic rock and roll in that way. Now, throughout the 70s, the early 70s, they're into like the Virtuosos and the Hendrix and the Zeppelins and all that. They are personally into that, but it's kind of the imitators of that turn them off a little bit. All the heavy noodling on the guitar, all that kind of stuff. They sort of fell out of favor with that, but closer to their peer group is actually at the glam and glitter scene in New York, where you have like the New York Dolls and those
Stooges
kind of bands, the Stooges, Iggy and the Stooges, and really those are kind of their heroes. I would say like the Beatles and the Beach Boys were the guys that they were into as younger kids, but as they became teenagers, the guy that they wanted to imitate was really Iggy and the MC5 out of Detroit and that stuff.
Right.
We think of now as like proto punk. They were really into that. Those were their favorite bands. Like that was their social scene at the time. So they kind of grow out of that stew. I've talked about it before about musicians who can or can't play their instruments. Now we always say like the Descendants or Rancid or all these ones. These are great musicians who come together to play punk rock. The idea of being in a band and not being able to play your instruments kind of comes from the Ramones, because they really got their instrumentation to be in the Ramones. Like they're in school together, and Tommy and Johnny have never really played together, but they know they want to be in a band together. So they just kind of buy instruments together, and they start playing, and they want to be like Iggy and the Stooges. Johnny specifically likes this band called The Ventures, which has this very specific like proto like punk style that he gets.
Well, they're like the Ventures are like surf rock, dude.
Yeah, and that's where he gets the Morrisite guitar, and that original Ramon sound comes from that, because he wanted to imitate the guy from The Ventures. So he picks that up. It's really interesting. So the original four members of the Ramones are like the four that everyone holds dear: Dee Dee, Johnny, Joey, and Tommy. Each contributed something very, very unique to like all of punk history within this initial time period. You have Johnny Ramone, who is the leader of the band from a business and like a drive standpoint. He is the guy that is managing the whole thing. Johnny is weird he's so conservative. That's what makes him a weird outcast.
Dude.
I mean, conservative, not only politically, which he is, but he's kind of militant, but he's militant to the point that he alienates people. So he's actually like the prototype of what I think like the straight edge guys and those guys kind of came to be, because there was just one way to do it, one way, and push through, and it got the Ramones through like tough economic times. But he was a monster, man. Like no one could get along with the guy.
He was a prick, man. And watching all these documentaries, I my opinion on this band has changed like 4 times in the last 10 days, dude. Like it is driving me nuts. Like I always liked Ramones core bands, so I always liked the Ramones, and but it wasn't like, you know how I'll tell people like, well, I don't like the Clash, but Branson's my favorite band. Well, this is like a different scenario, man, because the Ramones core bands quite literally just copy the Ramones and write new songs.
Right.
So if you like the Ramones core stuff, odds are you'll like the Ramones to at least a certain degree.
Yeah, it would always
Rancid
be impossible not to. Yeah, I see
right. So Rancid and the Clash, it's a little different, but I like their songs. As in, like, I've had 3 of their records at different points in my life. I think I still have 1 or 2 now, and I like all the hits are great. I'm not really tired of them, and some of the deep cuts are really, really good. And I have some notes written down, some of those. But I never spent a lot of time learning about the Ramones. You know me, man. I have a bad memory anyway. So like me learning some stuff, I'm gonna forget it, man. Like that's just what it is. So I spent a lot of time over the years, like just actively not learning about these legendary figures in the scene that I love so much. But dude, I don't think I like Dee Dee. I don't think I like Johnny. Joey is the only one that I felt like I had some kind of connection with, which I guess would make sense. He's the front man, and so it's good that you would have the connection with that guy, because if you don't, it's going to be hard to listen to a band as much as you want to, you know. But these people weren't good dudes. Like they were like,
no, and they weren't good to each other, and that's the key of the Ramones.
Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, and they might, like, there's a question if they were good people, honestly, as well.
Sure,
like, there is a question about that, but I think as it pertains is they famously, like, all these bands quote don't get along or whatever. No, the Ramones really, really didn't get along,
man.
Like to an epic point, and which you know, people have talked about it. They didn't even live to really see their success. Like they got like really rich and famous after these people died, and they all died right after the band was over. And you got to believe that some of the stress levels that these guys just lived with on a constant basis had to take their toll. And as I mentioned, Johnny was the catalyst of a lot of that stuff, because he was the one that wouldn't compromise on anything as it pertained to the sound. He wouldn't compromise on anything as it pertained to finance. A lot of the stuff that made the Ramones great, and a lot of reasons why the people loved the Ramones, it did kind of it also limited them. So he brought that. He also brought I've talked about it before, the downstrokes, which is so important, a musical innovation that the Ramones have. That got carried into thrash metal, got carried into all these genres of music, heavy guitar. He invents basically with that sound.
That sound is synonymous with not only punk rock, but specifically with the Ramones and the Ramones core type stuff. It's like, dude, there's so many songs and bands and albums that I wouldn't have, that at least they wouldn't sound the same as they do without that innovation. And there is something, I mean, look, with every action, you get a reaction, right? So his actions like that, there are some positives to come out of it. But boy, I tell you, I do think that they maybe behaved themselves into early graves. I mean, I just can't. I just don't know, man. I just can't. I can't wrap my head around it. I watched one of their documentaries. I watched it, I think maybe 2.5 times, and then I watched a bunch of smaller stuff, like, you know, throughout the week.
Yeah,
they were so mean to each other. Like they just weren't nice. Like the stuff I watched a Howard Stern interview.
On Stern, they hate each other, and that one in the 90s.
Man,
they are, and that's a later version of the band too. That's
and they're talking, and they're like, he's asking Joey, like, how do you feel about Johnny? He's like, well, I don't really like him. We used to be friends. And I'm like, they're sitting in front of each other and they're saying this stuff. I'm like, yo, like you can feel Howard Stern, who doesn't, you know, historically get uncomfortable or whatever. He's like, well, could we like maybe bury the hatchet? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what is going on right now? Like,
no, it's the realest tension of all time, and we'll weave that in. Now it's funny because before we'll get to Joey in a minute. The other one, so angry, like tough guy punk archetype comes from Johnny Ramone. He creates that and the guitar style. Well, like drug addicted, troubled person that just gets himself into trouble and like, you know, like punk rock troublemaker comes from Dee Dee Ramone. He
Dee
kind of
Dee, yeah.
creates that archetype. So Dee Dee he's very, so him and Johnny early on, there's always like what they call like I could say the more conservative camp, which is always like the bass player and Johnny, and then a bit of the more liberal camp, which is Joey and the drummer. Now the early conservative camp comes from again another child of a military brat, this time in Dee Dee, but Dee Dee grows up in Germany around like kind of the World War II stuff and all that, whereas Johnny grows up stateside, but very similar in that harsh discipline he grew up in, but he didn't react to that harsh discipline by like replicating it. Dee Dee reacted to it by the way a lot of us do, acted out, drugs, trouble, all of that kind of stuff. At the same time, he was insane in that like, okay, we do the downstrokes. Well, he did the downstrokes on the bass to that sort of militant kind of way. What's important by him is he is throughout their history, their primary songwriter. So he is the voice in a lot of these songs. Many of these songs are his voice. And all the great Ramones songs, he's the one doing the actual writing of them. Even after he leaves the band, he is still contributing songwriting to the band. He's sort of their permanent songwriter, and I would say sort of the voice of the Ramones. And kind of like for me, he was always, again, because I always liked the bass players. As a kid, he was always my favorite because he was like the trouble one. He was like the one that does all this stuff, and kind of like how like Fat Mike and those guys became in later generations. He's kind of the first version of that. And it's funny because he's friends with like Darby Crash and Sid Vicious and all this, and that kind of outlives all of them in that initial run. Eventually, the drugs get him in like 2002. It's more of a prolonged, sad ending.
Dude.
And his relationship with the band is severed beyond belief, and all of that stuff that happens throughout.
So out of all the guys in the band, I like Joey the most, I think, but I think I relate the most to Dee Dee. Maybe I even have those two things kind of equal for each of them. I like them both, and I relate to them both quite a bit. Dee Dee, he seemed a little bit. What's it called when you're self-centered and everything's got to be about you? It's
it's like self-absorbed or egocentric.
Yeah, there's a word for it. There's a word for it though, that it's a real disease, man. But he was kind of like, thank you. He was narcissistic. And I think that's where I don't have I don't have the same kind of stuff in common with him in that part of his life, but it's like everything else I kind of did. But like even when he gets up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony and says, I want to thank Dee Dee Ramone. I was like, bro, like, get over yourself, man. Thank the people that bought your records, dude. Thank your band members for sticking with you. And when you're out there doing drugs and acting like a fool, man, like, I don't know. That really turned me off. I chuckled at it the first time, but then like I said, I watched it a couple times. So like the second and third time I saw that, I just kind of like rolled my eyes and was really turned off by it. Because it's just like, I don't know, man. I feel like you should be a little more grateful for the stuff that other people contributed. Like, I know you may have wrote most of the songs, cool, but you can't play them all by yourself, and you can't buy all your own tickets, and you can't buy all your own records. So, I don't know. I found that very off-putting.
Like and I felt like he felt like this was the first time he was getting acknowledged, when like he was kind of always like the sentimental favorite Ramone. You know what I mean? So it's like he was always beloved within the context,
which I think is why he behaved that way, though. Personally, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, because he was he doesn't have so like Joey's like the rock star of the band, but Joey's kind of weird, so he can't really be the rock star, where Dee Dee sort of lived the rock star lifestyle, I think, for all of them. Within that band. And they talked about it later on, like part of why Johnny was the way he was is he had to put up with Dee Dee for all of these years. So that's part of where a bit of that shell comes from. But he also, they talked about it in one of the docs, he wanted to be with Sid Vicious and Johnny Thunders and on the cutting edge of fashion and all this stuff. And again, he's in the band with the guy that has to wear the same haircut, the same shirt, play the same song. So I found that the Ramones. Yeah.
I found that very interesting that he had a problem with that, because I didn't know that. But like, and then you got Johnny up there, like, God bless George Bush. Like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, just the most insane stuff to like leave as your legacy is to me. Like, you saw the part of the documentary where they're asking him about, I think he was asking him about Joey, wasn't he? About the funeral, and he's like, yeah, I didn't even go.
Yeah, he didn't want to be contacted. He didn't want to contact him because he figured he wouldn't want to be contacted in return.
Like, I just thought that was so crazy. Like that, I almost cried, dude. Like, I got so emotional hearing that.
And reading, I went back through, I have Marky's book on audiobook, and I kind of went in and out of it. And like, Marky talks about visiting Joey in the hospital, and Joey like fully expected Johnny to come visit him, just, as, brothers in the Ramones.
Yes.
So to speak. And he just did it. He just flat out flat out didn't. Let's go to Joey though, because Joey is the guy who creates. He's Milo before Milo. He creates the pop punk frontman, that sort of sad boy, the punk rocker, but also the indie rock frontman, and all of that sort of comes off of sort of the nerd kid who does rock and roll. That really comes off of Joey Ramone, and he's sort of the start of that, and everything grows off of him. Now he is the one. He is extremely talented. He's an extremely talented singer who didn't really know how to sing. And there's times when they get him into singing situations where you realize he could have been like a classic singer, but his problem, not only did he have substance abuse issues of his own, including some pretty heavy alcoholism, but he had a lot of undiagnosed mental illness from childhood. He was actually part of like a conjoined twin that had to be sewed out of him when he was very little. So he had a lot of oxygen. Yeah, he had a lot of oxygen deprivation as a child. And again, he's coming up in the 50s. They don't really know a lot about bipolar and schizophrenia, which he was diagnosed with all later in life. Very loving mother and brother he had, thankfully. In that era, say if he grows up where you and I grew up, he might have been just committed to a hospital, or left in the back of a room forever.
I mean,
thank God
probably.
his mom was like a piano player, artist, kind of bohemian lady, a hippie, who really kind of fostered him a little bit. And like his brother, Mickey Lay, who was around, and they were just like, man, they were just worried about him, and he couldn't read. And he was such a weird guy, and he loved rock and roll, and that was kind of his thing. He loved the Beatles. He loved all that. He specifically loved like the song Rock and Roll Radio. He loved just sitting next to the radio, and he could name all the songs, and music really was like that outpost for him that kind of made him, kind of normal to society, right. And then I think that's where the drinking and stuff came later on, is how to kind of maintain that. And it's funny. I think he was the one that had to deal with the persona of, like, all those other guys were just weird on their own. And so was Joey too, but Joey also had this persona to live up to too, that just, again, added to the shrimp, the mixture of these guys who just don't get along. And you have these three extreme personalities who are with the band. That three are with the band from the beginning all the way to 1988. So you got about like 15 years where they never get a bus. They're just in a van. They never have a hit, and they're just going at it and at it and at it. It's those three guys. And then you have the two drummers. The first one we'll talk about is Tommy. Now, Tommy musically is the least equipped of all three and is only there for this first three records, but they will all tell you he's actually, in terms of the sound, the most important Ramone. He's the one that actually creates the sound out of his...
Wasn't he like an engineer, kind of?
Yeah, so he was kind of... him and Johnny were... like about the same age in school, so they both sort of went off to college, so to speak, at the same time. And Johnny went through like 3 different colleges and like got kicked out of every single one within the course of 3 months, unsurprisingly. And in that time, I think Tommy came from a little bit richer of a family and was able to kind of go to like an art school kind of thing to learn sound engineering. So he picked that up, and actually it's in I think Joey's mom's like art studio. She kind of let some kids mess around with some stuff and doing recording. So he knows Johnny, and they kind of want to get a band together. They're not really sure what to do. They buy guitars. They know Joey. Joey's a drummer. So Joey's going to actually be their drummer. Tommy's like their manager. Tommy starts out kind of producing him. Dee Dee was going to sing. But the problem is Dee Dee couldn't sing and play at the same time. He just couldn't figure out how to do the both. So you could write, even though
it's so hard.
So Dee Dee just sticks to the bass, and then they kind of put Tommy over at the drums, and they bring Joey out to sing. And that's how Joey kind of becomes the singer. Tommy doesn't really know how to play drums, so he invents the style where as they talk about it, he follows the guitar instead of the other way around. So that's why the style of the Ramones is like so guitar driven, that the early kind of blitzkrieg bop is like it's ran by that guitar and bass more so than the drums, and the drums kind of work around it. But
interesting,
Tommy is in the spirit of guys that we love that are these super producers, that he's like a ranger guy. He knew how long the song should or shouldn't be. He was more in tune with like pop culture and stuff like that than the other guys. So those 4 Ramones, and he's the normal one. He is the normal one. That's why he only lasts 3 albums, because you can only deal with those guys and those personalities. And then on top of that, think of the music scene they're going into. No one has ever heard of punk rock before. They are literally the first. So they're on an early tour with Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath thinks they're so cool, this badass band from New York that they're going to take with them. And those hippies that are going to see Black Sabbath, those acid rock guys, see this 1950s doo-wop band in leather jackets doing these things with no guitar solos, and they start throwing eggs at them. You know what I mean? It was 3 years of that, and eventually that leads to Marky, who I'll end with the other core Ramone. He comes in on the 4th album. Marky is in the Sing. He's in Voidoids, but he's actually like a metal drummer, and he comes in and kind of expands their sound because he was a more competent drummer, but he studies under Tommy for years and years and years to learn that Ramones drum song. Kind of like we talked about with the Descendants, how Milo never left. Tommy
Right.
never really leaves the Ramones. And really, I said this in one of my Ramones videos on my channel. The only way out of the Ramones is, I'm not kidding, in a body bag. Like once you're in, you're kind of always in the Ramones. It is sort of that gang in that way.
This band is so strange to me. I never thought of them as like tough guys, but they were referred to as like tough, dangerous guys by a number of different people. You mentioned earlier that Joey was a good singer, and I was pretty flabbergasted by you saying that because I thought he was an absolutely terrible singer. Now I like his singing, but he doesn't sound like he's very good at it. So would you elaborate on that a little bit? What makes him a great singer?
Well, I think he had the big voice, and I think he had all of those ranges where he could do like that late 80s stuff. He does basically that drunk inflection stuff where he could do that real gravelly stuff. Or you have the earlier albums where it's almost that 1950s doo-wop stuff. And I think he could have really been in that. Yeah, I think he could have been in that like Beatles style that he liked. If you listen to End of the Century, half the songs on there are just like 60s rock sort of.
Well, yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, so
but I didn't think
that super range. I just think producers try to get.
Wait. He's got a range?
Yeah, because
everything he did sounded exactly the same.
But I would compare like that 1950s doo-wop on End of the Century to Somebody Put Something in My Drink. Like that's a totally different deal. Like
I disagree, man. I think they sound very comparable, like incredibly, so much so that like I had to take a break from listening to it because of the vocals. Everything else changes up throughout the albums, even the production, the guitar tone a little bit, the drums a lot, but the vocals was the one constant. It sounded now. If I go back
he's got like the Danzig style vocals in the 80s. He's got a lot of that kind of more style.
I didn't hear that in any of it. In all fairness, I'll go give it more time.
Yeah,
I'm going on, like I've listened to the Ramones for years and years and years, but I've never like sat down and like
and to put
studied their music. Yeah, so I'm not going to sit here and just be like, "Yeah, you're wrong," but like I definitely didn't get that out of it. So I was really surprised to hear you say that because I feel like his vocals are the one thing that was the most consistent throughout their discography because his voice is very much his voice. There's not anything that I can point at and go, well, this sounds like I can tell you tons of guys that like emulate it and don't do it as well. But his vocals were very, very.
I don't think he knew how to sing though really well. Like I don't think he actually knew how to sing or didn't.
I wholeheartedly agree with that
because
he definitely didn't know how to sing.
He goes into like other voices and stuff on parts of it when it's like almost unnecessary at times, and that's kind of part of what their style was, and also part of what you can get out of him because that was also his real personality too in making some of those songs. That's why again, End of the Century is thought of and as actually you can argue with the Joey solo record because that's the one album he really really sings on in that earnest kind of way. And the rumor is even on the studio they overdubbed all the other guys' parts anyway. It's basically a Joey solo record is what we got.
Interesting. Well, when we get off of the podcast tonight, if you don't mind, send me a few things if you can think of off the top of your head of like, hey, go listen to this, this, and this, and then just so I can go listen to it. Well, I'm gonna go take a walk with my wife later, and it'll give me some time to like listen to a few things and really try to see where you're coming from because I'm trying to instead of just arguing about something, I'd like to learn more and then at least have something I can go, okay, well, I did listen to those, and either my opinion has changed to where I think you're absolutely correct, or here's why I don't agree with that. That way we can have more of a civil debate versus an argument. I think that this show's really taken a turn for the better. So I'd like to keep that momentum going if we can. I think that the End of the Century album was pretty interesting. Well, again, we'll talk about these albums here in a few more minutes, but the Ramones stuff is the band it's so crazy. Like some of the words, some of the language they used, like some of the stuff Dee Dee said was just so wild. Like I can't believe it's on video of him saying just the way they talked about people, specifically POC, man, like people of color, the way he was, and it wasn't like disrespect. It was just, but it was wild. Well, the way that they just talk, like
so and so is from a different time, but the Ramones are actually from a different time. You know what I mean?
Right. They're like brought up from the 50s.
They actually are, and it's like so you kind of, but at the same time, like we do know that Johnny and Dee Dee did collect Nazi memorabilia. Like that did happen. Like that's not in dispute in any way, shape, or form. You know.
Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry.
Sure.
What's up, little dude? You going to bed?
Yes.
Okay. You want to say hi to Rob?
Yeah.
Okay. Say hello.
Hey.
Hi.
All right. I love you.
Too.
Okay. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay.
Okay.
All right, go to bed, sweet boy.
Okay. Okay.
Bye, Parker.
Who's that?
Here, go ahead and close my door for me, okay?
Who's that?
That's my weights.
It's a big this way.
Yes, the biggest ones. I got to try to get strong.
Yes.
All right, I love you, little bear. Sorry about that. But yeah, man, they collected Nazi memorabilia, huh?
Yeah.
You know
which,
what?
Again, it wasn't necessarily uncommon for men of that era to do that.
I was
though,
gonna
but-
say, I think that was kind of a regular thing. I mean, even now when I see some of that stuff, if it's genuine, I get like enamored by it because it's so crazy to me. Like I look at it and go, "Whoa, that's real," and then I'm
Yeah.
like, can I look at that?" Because it is something that's like, I don't know that I'd want to own any of it because it's just so. I mean, weren't they Jewish?
Well, that's the thing. So, very derogatorily, Johnny would refer to the drummer and Joey as the rabbis of the group, and like he
Okay,
would-
because
yeah.
Joey was definitely Jewish.
So
I mean,
again,
it's-
here's the central conflict of the band. You have very conservative-minded, very right-wing style Johnny and Dee Dee to an extent, and then you have Jewish liberal Joey. It's just a culture clash. It is a culture
Man.
clash the entire time. Like so to the point where Marky talks about his book where on the bus, like Johnny's just going on these rants of like, my people built this country and yours are living off of it and this kind of thing. Like in every place they're going to, yeah. Like again, if it's the modern time, like he's in Five Finger Death Punch in the modern era, right?
wow, that honestly kind of bums me out because like I am not the kind of guy that can necessarily separate the art from the artist easily. And I'm not saying that these guys are like necessarily scumbags or that they did anything that was necessarily that bad, but it does paint them in a different light. And it does make me wonder things. Like I don't know, man. It makes me wonder, you know, and I will say this. They did seem like they were real family because they fought like real family, but they stuck with it and they still toured and such. But they also broke up like a real family would
Like a
break
real
up. Like there
yeah.
was real venom there. There was real hatred in this,
Well,
and they were really angry with each other, and you could feel it.
they were also kind of organized like a family in that kind of way. Like, go back to the Johnny stuff, but they talk about like the van. So the infamous van where they had like a seating chart on the van of where they all
That's
sit.
so
They were-
weird.
And it was like, again, but it's also how they were able to keep that. They were the first band to invent DIY touring in that kind of way. They were the first band to be that famous, but not really making a whole lot of money off of what they were doing. So they had to figure out, like they talked about it. Marky talks about it. It's the only band he ever played with, and he played with all kinds of bands where he drew a regular paycheck also. Like every other Friday, the Ramones just paid him a check. It didn't matter, and it was an even thing. Like every tour, every album cycle, it didn't matter how many people came to that show or this and that. And it's kind of funny too. Like thanks to Johnny too, you can also argue that there's an argument to be made that the Ramones are a T-shirt company. That they're yeah, and especially in their heyday when they really didn't sell a lot of music, what the Ramones sold were T-shirts. And again, so that had to be very organized and very, place to place, and you're dealing in cash business and having to keep that organized. They were a very, very well run organization in that way. They set the template for a lot of these bands, again, in the do-it-yourself kind of way. And it's kind of weird because they're on major label technically the whole time until the late 80s, but because they never had a hit on the major label, they're just kind of off to the side. So major label for them just meant they got producers. They weren't really given anything else besides it because they weren't really given radio play. They weren't really given any of that. They were given producers and managers, and that was about what they received through most of their career, and they had to come up with the other way to do it. And it's funny because they hated being on that bus because you talk about like Johnny's listening to the Yankee game, just going on and on driving all night, and then he takes over, and then Joey's got his OCD, so he's got to touch every step from the way up to the way down when they stop at the gas stations. They're going through that. So they're hating each other on this bus. And it's funny, you talk about the Lollapalooza that you went to. There's a story of Lars and Tim seeing the Ramones van, and they're sitting on the van in the different seats, and they think it's the coolest thing ever. And the Ramones are just there thinking how dumb it is that these kids was thinking cool it is to sit in their van that they just hate being in. And it's funny to see Rancid fanboying, but also like the levels to that, because we would probably do that to Rancid and they would think like our bus is lame,
right?
And it's just the way it goes, man.
I had something and I forgot. I had a thought and I wanted to say it. I forgot what it was, but yeah, I don't know, man. I just I don't know. If I remember my thought in the middle of our conversation, I'll bring it up. But
Sure. Do you want to talk about
Dude,
some of their?
I had it, and then I was like listening to you, and then you started talking about Rancid, and my brain went, "Meh," and I just
Yeah.
like
And
lost track of
I
what I
was
was
trying to
thinking.
relate it to you because it's your first show and all that, and they're a part of that, right? Because
That
the Ramones are part of your initial like your punk rock
dude,
baptism, man.
I saw like one of their very last shows, dude. Like
Yeah,
they
96.
broke up.
That's
They broke up like 2 months after I saw them play. Like final breakup over with.
something I was hoping. Speaking on the Rancid thing, then we'll go into some of the earlier stuff. What was cool is like that version of 53rd and Third is kind of owned by like them and Lars and Tim now because they played it with them at that last show.
Right.
And they were, they were sort of getting in the same camps. It's really interesting everything that Rancid has said about the Ramones over the years. There was an interview years ago I had with Tim where he said, "Yeah, the Clash were the ones that influenced us, like, and specifically what we did, but the Ramones were our influence because they were an American band like us that went on tour in the U.S. and event. Like they found that more a little personally relatable to them." Go ahead, you got it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. They never had like a hit because how many songs do we know of?
No, they never have. So like there's one hit wonders. They are a no hit wonder.
So none of their songs got radio play. Blitzkrieg
No.
Bop, I Want to Be Sedated. None of them.
No, so
Judy was a punk.
No. Sheena is a punk rocker. Got like a 2-week run, and then it got banned from radio stations.
Whoa.
The biggest hit they ever had was "Baby I Love You," which is on End of the Century in the UK. It was a fairly big hit. Like it
and
was
it's like a
top
cover
100
song.
Yeah, and it's a horrible like 50s like song. And so
I
technically
literally have a note about that song being
the
like
most
a
people
shitty
that
cover.
ever heard a Ramones song would have theoretically been that. The Blitzkrieg Bop picks up a little bit of traction in 1991 when Budweiser uses it in a Super Bowl commercial. That was, and this is
So they really didn't get to bear the fruits of their labor
think
at
about
all.
this. So they talk about this. So the 80s punk scene, they're influencing all this hardcore, all this stuff. These bands are getting big. They're wearing Ramones shirt, and the Ramones are opening for them. Nirvana and Soundgarden are shouting out the Ramones, Rancid, The Offspring. All these bands are Green Day. They're huge. Who's the biggest band? Who's the number one influence? But it was almost too late. By that time, they're still going on their initial run, and I think guys like you are seeing this older band that seems like they're on fumes. They never stopped that first run. They never stopped looking for that first hit. They had
Interesting. That explains a lot.
It's funny because like there's footage of the 90s of like Drew Barrymore and Cameron Diaz like sneaking into clubs to go see the Ramones on that last tour, and Bruce Springsteen was trying to write songs for them, and they were Stephen King's favorite band, and he brings them in for all this. So it's funny. So like the Hollywood elite and like the in crowd knew who the Ramones were. Nicolas Cage and Johnny Ramone became great friends, and Lisa Marie Presley spoke at Johnny's funeral, because they were so influenced by the Ramones, these Hollywood kids and all this, but they never have a hit. So like technically bands that aren't that big, bands like, okay, I don't want to say the big, but like Rancid, commercially Rancid blows the Ramones out of the water just by having Out Come the Wolves. And it's insane. NoFX has, a bigger presence in American pop radio than the Ramones ever did.
Man, I didn't really know that.
Insane. That's why
is
there's
insane.
some misconceptions about them, though. I think too, because like your classic rock people know of them, but like they're not on classic rock radio. So it's like, but they're part of that sort of that kind of thing, though. You know what I mean? Like that's where they kind of belong. They're of that generation and they're of that influence. I think the thing that maybe they're analogous to is maybe like Bob Marley and that kind of stuff. That's really influential in that time, but really wasn't played on the radio either.
Right.
That's about what it is. But it's funny. They talked about it in one of the documentaries. That's part of why they had to be such road dogs, and the DIY-ness of punk is you go to this town and then 5 kids see that and then they start a scene here, a scene there, and that's how punk kind of grew from these little tiny scenes, and that's how you have all these little scenes. With the thing about it is they're really only that small though in America. As I said, their biggest radio hit was in the UK. They're huge in Central America, and they sort of godfather punk on July 4th, 1976 there in the UK. That's the first UK punk show where the Damned, the Pistols, the Buzzcocks, the Clash are all in attendance at that show. And basically, as legend has it, kind of formed bands after seeing the Ramones that night, because they knew of the Ramones, but then they got to see that they were like real people and they weren't just like this mythical kind of thing. And it really set the whole scene on fire. It's, the whole thing with Sid Vicious is Dee Dee. He wanted to be Dee Dee Ramone. That was the whole thing. Is he thought Dee Dee was the coolest thing. The only songs that Sid Vicious knew how to play were Ramone songs that he would kind of learn. It's just we talked about Circle Jerks last week. It's Ramones. The influence of the Pistols and stuff really comes in later on. It all really goes back to the Ramones in that first era until basically other stuff that they influence comes up, and maybe people start taking from that stuff. But it all originally spawns off of like the Ramones, and then like the other bands that would have been like the Dolls and stuff like that. But the Ramones are more
Right.
into punk as we think of punk. They just more look like
Right.
punk than those bands do.
Well, them not having any kind of hit at all, like, really makes me understand their bitterness. Like, they were so jaded and bitter. And that leads me to my one hot take that I would like to talk about before we
Okay.
get into album specifics.
Yeah.
The more I think about this, the more I learn about them, and the more I understand who they were, I think maybe they were never a punk band. Like, they weren't aiming to be a punk band. They weren't trying to be a punk band. They were actively trying to get rich and famous.
Mhm.
That is not what punk rock is about. They were trying to replicate something from the 50s, but their goal was to get famous and make a lot of money. And I think maybe the bands that they influenced were more punk than the Ramones. And look, gray area here, okay? I'm not stupid. I understand that this is just a thought I'm having. It's not necessarily how I feel about it, but it is something that should be talked about, I think, because are they really a punk band? Are the Ramones really a punk band? Like, I mean, shoot, dude, I've been calling them pop punk for a long time. That might be more accurate than I ever realized, because they weren't doing this intentionally. If they had had their way, they would have been huge like the Beatles.
But
And that's
then-
not what,
I agree.
because they didn't write anything about, they weren't about like social commentary. They weren't out there trying to, so like punk rock, as I see it anyways, is about community and helping. That's not what they were about.
But no, but they were the godfathers of the underground music, though. So,
But
like,
not by choice is my point.
But they,
So-
but they were. But here's the thing: that wasn't a thing before they didn't make it, though. That was only
Correct.
an option, because that's why, like, I agree with what you're saying, but they still created the template that all these other bands who would claim to be punk went off of, because they still did it and kept
Well,
that
you can-
in the process of that. Yeah,
But you
they
can
didn't know-
be
they
not
didn't- They
this.
never
You
tried to
can
be
be-
punk, because punk, they got called punk like their second album in. Some music
Sure.
writers say that's punk. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I guess I'm just absolutely correct, because that's what you're basically saying. Because they weren't trying to do that. Now
No,
you can create a template for something and still have nothing to do with it. That's not even that weird.
Yeah, I would say not. So version 1, you are correct. Once we get to the 80s and punk exists as it does, you can see there's very much an intention of them leaning into what they have created.
Yeah, but even that was like not because they wanted to do it necessarily. They just thought they should do that so they could make some money.
Yeah.
Like, I watched a ton of footage on these guys, and everything that they were saying was blowing my mind. Like, because like I said, I never did any deep dives into these dudes as people, so I didn't.
But my thing about it, and again, I'm not disagreeing. I've had that same take before as well. The only thing I would say is, like, the whole, like, what we think of in that way of being punk rock doesn't really come into, like, the DC stuff and, like, Ian MacKaye and that stuff, because, like, it's not like the Pistols weren't trying to be big and weren't on major levels. It wasn't like all that initial brand of punk. It wasn't about. It was
That's
about
true.
knocking
That's
over
true.
the rock and roll establishment, but it wasn't about not being a part of it. It's really
Right.
that 80s scene, those little smaller 80s scenes that create their own subculture. The punk that the Ramones and the Pistols and all this is a part of, it's not subculture. It's mainstream culture at the time. It's all mainstream culture until it goes underground, and then it develops into this thing that you and I more relate to in that kind of way. You and I more think of it.
So I think the answer to that question is A, who cares, right? Does it really matter?
It's just a discussion point, though.
It's just well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, for the viewers that are going to get all pissy and go, well, why does it matter? It doesn't really matter. It's just a conversation. I'm not even going to say that I was necessarily right about it. I'm not going to say that you're necessarily right about it. I'm not going to say that either of us are wrong about it. But it is something to think about, because as you and I see punk rock, they really weren't. They just created this stuff by accident. And then people with a different, like, mindset and set of morals and an ethos were like, oh, well, this is music that we can play. We can make it the way that they made it. And we can also tour the way that they toured. We can dress the way they dressed because we liked that aesthetically. But we can put our own set of, like, I guess, standards, for lack of a better word, in place of some stuff. And now we have this thing that we do that it got created by accident, but we still love it. And I mean, movies do that. Movies have special effects that were created by accident. Well, we didn't really mean to do this, but we did that. And now these other guys come in, and that's like their jam. They do this, and that's what they intend to do. And so,
Well, I think movie franchise. I was watching a thing years ago with the Nightmare on Elm Street thing, and they were interviewing the guys who directed Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And like everyone's mad at them for messing with the lore of the franchise. They're like, hey, it was the second movie. There was not a lore yet to be messed with.
Right.
We were creating
Right.
the lore, and it's kind of similar in this as they created the lore. It's kind of similar, I guess. I would say anyone who creates anything in a genre though does sort of go through this. This is
yeah.
It is kind of like. They're sort of the least of that thing because they never consciously tried to be that thing. That's why I guess you could say that like the Pistols are more punk rock because the Pistols tried to be the Ramones. The Ramones didn't try to be the Ramones. The Ramones just kind of were.
Let's go.
For me, that's what makes them more punk rock because they just are that. Like they're not. They're
So,
they're
I mean,
ascendant even above that.
If you want to get down to like the nitty gritty and actually have an answer, it's a two-pronged answer. Yes, they were punk because they didn't have any other choice. No, they were not punk because they were absolutely trying to just be rock stars. And so, you take all that, you mix it all together, you give them the aesthetic that they had because they looked awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So, they had a kind of a unique greaser look with a different kind of hairstyle, a little more disheveled greaser because greasers were all about their hair looking nice. These dudes just wanted to be kind of disheveled looking and a little more rough and rowdy, right? So, it's like the Outsiders versus like, the movie Grease. It's like those are two different kinds of guys doing the same thing, but you have like the punk version and you have like this high school popular guy version. And it's like, okay, so one's punk by accident because they just kind of had no other choice. It's an interesting thing to think about, though. It was really bothering me, man, to be honest. I was like, man, it's everything that I love, just a big farce, like, because this is the band that created it, and they're not at all what I think of as when I think of punk. But I mean, in reality, I knew that. Like, I knew that what their idea is like, let's just make faster doo-wop songs, basically, and let's try to get famous doing it. Like, I knew that, but I never really thought about it. So when they start talking about it in these interviews, my mind gets blown 7 or 8 different times. I'm like, oh, I guess I can't believe they're saying this. Like, but in reality, like you said, like there wasn't punk back then. There was no DIY scene. So they were just trying to be a band, and part of being a band is trying to get famous. And then from the failures of the Ramones comes DIY punk rock, something you can do without having to sign to a giant label and get a bunch of money.
Well, it's funny because like I talked about they were the kings of the underground. They really were, and the underground specifically I'm talking about is the CBGB in New York. So for 2 years they are like basically the house band of CBGB, but like, it's not just them. So, but it's them, it's Blondie, it's Television. They're the only band that would go on to be known like as a punk band, though. So they sort of flew that flag. But all those bands were into the Ramones, but they had their own. Like Television was more of like became like what Weezer and those other bands kind of became,
like mod rock.
Yeah. And Blondie kind of became
new wave.
Of new wave and what a lot of other stuff came. And again, they were all just thought
all great bands.
Yeah, and they were all sort of doing this offshoot thing of the Ramones. And the Ramones. For about 2 years, that's where Glenn and Jerry and all them go to CBGBs and see the Ramones, and then go back to their New York place and make their Misfits. And so it's about 2 years of there, and then they start touring, and then they start planting the scenes all over the country. In New York, the New York scene kind of dies. It doesn't revive again till the second wave of CBGBs, where the Ramones are the big stars and the hardcore stuff starts coming in New York, and then they sort of revive themselves as kings of hardcore. Basically, once the Ramones' initial run, which I like to say are those first 4 albums, and I know you listen to them quite a bit, Ramones, Leave Home, Rocket to Russia, Road to Ruin, which to me are like that core, I wouldn't say the core punk, the core Ramones sound is those first 4 albums. Like, what is the Ramones? It's those 4 albums. After that, end of the century, I would say they tried to sell out unsuccessfully. I think they just misjudged the direction that they should have.
Well, the what's his face that produced that, Phil Spector. I mean, that guy just ruined that record, man. It sounds like a fake Ramones record by the Ramones. It doesn't make any sense. It's very weird. Like I listen to that record was just terrible. I hated it. Oh, before I forget this, I want to concede something to you.
What's that?
So okay. A few weeks ago, we had our top guitarist episode.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I was saying that I didn't think you could put Johnny Ramone in the not that you could, but I thought it was odd that you'd put somebody up there that was so bad at their instrument, right? Because I think he was terrible at playing guitar. But as I'm listening to all this music and as I'm watching all these interviews and I'm listening to other people talk about these guys, I think that conversation needed to have both of our views, because my view was like, who did I enjoy listening to because they were good at it? And yours was kind of like, well, who's more influential? I think you kind of have to have both, man, because I have to concede that I do think he belongs on that Mount Rushmore, for lack of a better term, top 5, whatever. Because while he wasn't quote unquote great at playing guitar, there wasn't crazy solos. He only did downstroking for the most part because he just didn't really know how to play otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
He developed a style, developed a sound, and more importantly, they wrote. Okay, so I don't know who wrote the guitar for those songs. I assumed it was him. Maybe I'm wrong, but so they wrote just a mountain of incredibly memorable songs. So like as I'm, opinions and thoughts and things change. So over the course of some months, my opinion on this has just really changed. It's shifted. That not that I was necessarily wrong in my take on it, but that I also should have included a couple of other people that I had excluded for a specific reason. That reason I just think is not correct. I think I should have just understood that what we were talking about wasn't just talent. It was also kind of luck. He lucked out that he did all this stuff the way he did it, and it became accidentally great, if that makes any sense. I don't know. I think I know what I'm trying to say, but
yeah, and also the thing about it is no one else to this day has ever been able to replicate that sound on the guitar though either. So like he was sort of a one of one at that. Like even like the reason why Billy Joe Armstrong plays power chords. He doesn't play the full bar chords. The guys in the Descendants played those full bar chords, that same style. No one else played quite like that with that rigidity, and it has that very, very unique sound. And even it's funny, even in the 80s stuff where they have a little bit of guitar work on there, it's not Joey actually even on those records doing it. It's when they brought in Daniel Ray and actually CJ Ramone, where they have a few little leads in little places on some of those 80s records. It's other people.
Interesting.
Because he just refused to, he just was not going to do once that was, you think of him as an old man that just would get set in his ways. Like, okay, this one way worked for it this one time, and this is how I'm going to do it forever. He
was like that on everything from the moment he started this shit. Like he was an old curmudgeon, stuck in his ways shithead at age like 20. Like
so Marky talked about like he had a milk and like a lettuce or whatever that he would get for dinner every single night, and he would eat that. He would buy the same thing from the store every single day and eat the same thing because it costed exactly the same. Just that sort of personality. And I think with guitar playing,
milk and lettuce, is that what you said?
It was like milk, and it was like something. It was like a sandwich or something. It's funny. There's a story of them being in Europe, and they get we eat the iceberg lettuce over here, and then they have like the real lettuce, when they're in Europe, and he thinks it's like trash. He throws it on the ground because he thinks it's so bad.
Dude, iceberg lettuce is terrible.
Oh, it's but yeah, it's just like again, like talk about someone who so if Dee Dee was a narcissist, Johnny was like unable to just ever expand his horizons. Like
he was just an asshole, to be honest. He was a prick.
Yeah, it was, but it's funny. It's like, and the band never breaks up. Like and it's funny because the central conflict here it ends up being creative. But the reason why it gets so big on creative is because it's a classic thing. It's over a girl. Like this stuff happens in the middle of the band over a girl, and they still don't speak to each other for all this time. It is insane the level of pettiness that these men were able to go to.
In all fairness, I think didn't Johnny marry her?
Yeah, she's still his widow. I mean, she's still in charge of his estate and
yeah. So I mean, clearly that wasn't just some. No, I'm going to steal your girlfriend fling. I still think it's low down, but
it wasn't. But I think what it was is I think it's more about Johnny than it is even the girl. To be honest with you, it's more of like this guy who's like my mortal enemy. I
totally understand that. That makes perfect sense.
And then there was a little bit of sentimentality. I think that was the closest thing he ever got to like a long-term partner. Probably was her, and then she ends up with Johnny, and it's funky because like so part of the thing is they were always allowed to bring one significant other on the van. Like that's part of how the van was until Linda gets with Johnny. She's not allowed on the van. So then so he's the one who can't bring his significant other, which just causes even more tension.
I mean, in all fairness, dude, I wouldn't want her on there either. I'd be like, nah, bro, sorry, dude.
No, but again, they stayed together, and as is pointed out, yes, they never had a hit, but they also weren't on the soup line either. Like as Mark said, they got consistent checks. The T-shirt money did what it did to sustain them, but they kept at it. Like the two of them kept at it, and they didn't have other members left, but the two that hated each other the most stayed at it.
Wasn't one of the drummers like cut out of the T-shirt?
Well, so that's Richie. Now,
That's right, Richie.
What happens is Marky comes in with Road to Ruin, so he's the drummer on Sedated and so and Marky was, like I say, he's not an original Ramon. Marky was a punk rocker in New York who went to see the Ramones, who was just kind of in the scene. He was in
That's awesome.
Voidoids, and then he just he sort of steps in and he's able to fill it. And he's actually a better drummer than Tommy. Yada yada yada. Well, problem with Marky is he turns into be this massive alcoholic. So whenever they go for End of the Century with Phil Spector, he's the only one that gets along with Phil Spector because they're just drunk the whole time together. Marky's drums for sure do not appear on the record because he was barely able to record when they went out there. So he lasts all the way for 2 more albums, and then Johnny's had enough of him. I think he actually missed a couple of shows, and that was the one thing. Another part of like punk rock ethos that they started is like you just don't miss shows. You make your dates. You make your towns.
Right.
And when Marky messed that up for like 2 different shows, like that was it. He was out. So they bring in Richie. Richie was like this really good musician as well, and I think he was kind of like a little more hip than the rest of the band, and he actually sped up the
bunch
set.
of nerds.
Yeah, he kind of was. But like at that point though, the Ramones were becoming institutionalized, so people would have grown up like watching the Ramones and then wanting to like be a part of them. And Richie sped up their set and had a pretty cool vibe to him. But then he was just sort of a hired gun, getting that regular check, and he wanted a piece of that T-shirt money. And he walks out like mid tour, like there were still shows to go. They actually bring in Clem Burke, and they call him Elvis Ramone from Blondie.
That's awesome.
They bring him in for like 2 songs, and then at that point, Marky has cleaned up. Is no longer. He actually does like the AA thing, which really worked for him because he would go everywhere they'd go on. He said that worked for him because everywhere they'd go on tour, he could find a meeting in every town.
That's dope.
And he would just go there for every meeting. So like Marky is crazy. Marky was like working construction and he was like a postman and stuff in New York in the late 80s. And he said he came back and he's like, cool, I'm back, I'm sober. And Johnny and Joey still hadn't spoke.
That's so crazy, bro.
And
it makes me really sad, dude.
And Dee Dee has had enough of them too, but Dee Dee is so whacked out of his mind. Dee Dee's bored with the Ramones in the mid 80s, and that's when he wants to do rap, and that's when he wants to do everything else.
Dude, we got to talk about these albums here in a minute, but like last thing that I'm gonna say before I just let you talk the records, because I have notes on the records too, is that when I was in Austin, I'm like flipping through albums, and what do I find? The D.D. King album.
D.D. King, yeah.
But it was in the punk rock section. It's like rap was like, no, dude, y'all take this shit. We don't want it. I almost bought it because it's so bad. I was just gonna buy it and mail it to you.
So I need to do a proper video on it because it deserves that full attention of like.
Boy, you're a brave man.
I know, but it's like it's funny because like Dee had something in his head and he wasn't off about connecting the genres and stuff. He just was the wrong messenger. I think.
Yes, well, he was. I mean, again, it was a very unpunk thing to do. He was doing it solely to try to make some money. And he's like, I'm not black. I can't talk like them or something. And I was like, bro, what? The stuff that guy said was so out of pocket.
What's funny is like that era. So you have so post End of the Century, you've got they start working with all these different producers. That becomes a thing. A producer, because people still wanted to work with the Ramones. Someone thought they were going to make a hit out of these bands. And it's funny, like he just writes Pet Sematary in about 10 minutes and just gives it to the band before he pieces out. In the late 80s, and they bring in CJ. Now CJ is literally like this younger Dee Dee. So if Johnny and Dee Dee were military brats, well, CJ's actually like in the Marines when they pick him up. So Johnny likes him immediately because he's got that sort of like discipline that he likes about him. Never mind the fact that he goes AWOL to join the Ramones and actually ends up in jail. Like what? So they do it to replace Dee Dee because he's like not a junkie and right away, but then. He develops a bond more with Joey. Joey's actually because Joey's a nicer guy, obviously. But CJ is awesome. CJ still plays with Me First in the Gimme Gimmes, and he finishes out that last run. He replaces Dee Dee like whole hog. Like if Dee Dee sang on a song,
he still plays with them right now.
Yeah, he's so like
that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's the bass player for Me First in the Gimme Gimmes, and then like on he's CJ Ramone on Fat Records. He has a few albums out. He'll do some tours. Like so when I went and saw the No Effects tour, the most recent Punk in Drublic. So you had like Lagwagon, Bouncing Souls, No Effects, and Me First playing in the evening. Well, the cover band was the one where I was going to go eat some fried chicken during the cover band. That was my thing during Me First. But I had to just see a little bit of. I wanted to see CJ. I had to see a real life Ramone, performing. So he's 20 years younger than the rest of the band, but very much he's a New Yorker. Very much in the mold of those guys. So he's kind of like the one league that's in our scene now currently that still goes all the way back to the Ramones. So him, Marky, and Richie are still around. Tommy passed away in 2014, and the rest of them, 2001 for Joey, 2002 for Dee Dee, and 2004 for Johnny. So they really didn't. They retired in '96. They really didn't even get to experience the fruits of their labor. To be sort of the rock, they kind of are more the rock stars now than they ever were during their career.
That's crazy, dude. It's so weird that I'd never realized that they didn't have an actual hit. I apologize for my fidgeting. I can't. I'm trying to focus on what you're saying, and it's really hard. I've been sitting in this chair all day. So let's talk about some of their records.
Sure.
We spent a pretty good amount of time learning about the band, and I thought that was a freaking amazing conversation. I appreciate all the time and stuff that you took to relay all this stuff to me because, while some of it I knew, some of it I did not. So, and you're very good at articulating this stuff. So, the first album came out, and you said what, 1976?
70. I've got it up here to make sure exactly. It was 76. Yeah, April 23rd, 76. So almost 18 years.
That's awesome.
All right, 18 years ago.
I was like, what?
However the math works on that, there's an 8 in there somewhere.
Isn't that
48 years?
48? Yeah.
A long time ago. So this initial record, again, so the Ramones are one of the bands you can argue that their debut was their strongest output. A lot of people do.
I definitely would agree with that.
You could just say they could be the first album Ramones forever. There's not a bad song on here, and it's all the foundational songs. Obviously, Blitz Sweet Bop, which they take from the Bay City Rollers, and that becomes like the foundational song of punk rock. Beat on the Brat, another iconic punk song. Every band you've ever known has covered it. Judy is a punk. With the first time they bring in the word punk to refer to their music, and the first song that's like that blistering speed. I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, which I think you can argue is kind of the first pop punk song in that sort of way, even though it's really a take off the Beatles. Chainsaw, which gets that the Johnny Ramone guitar style. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, one of their many songs about sniffing glue that they have. It really brings on that sort of the misfit sort of quality to their music. You go to I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, starts out with that iconic bass line from Dee Dee Ramone. Loudmouth, I'm a loudmouth, baby. You got to shut it up. And it's that sort of the first sign of the punk attitude. Havana Affair, Listen to My Heart, both great songs. And then one I want to talk about with you is 53rd and 3rd, which is the one I said later on that Rancid covers. But it's the first really like edgy punk rock song because it's an autobiographical tale of Dee Dee Ramone selling himself on the streets there of New York.
Dee Dee or Joey?
Dee Dee. As a male prostitute there working in New York on the famous street 53rd and 3rd, and supposedly the whole thing is biographical, at least if not directly involved with Dee Dee, a situation he was very much aware of. And that's kind of the first like punk rock song that really kind of colors in those sort of lines and that sort of like the edginess of punk rock. Like on the same album where they have songs called I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, they have this song, they have
right.
I Don't Want to Get Down in the Basement, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like songs about, killing people. I Don't Want to Walk Around with You on top, and Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World, where everybody sings, I'm a Nazi baby and I'll fight for the fatherland. They also put that in the lyrics there.
That's so crazy. I wrote out a few things for this album. I put down on here that they pronounce massacre wrong, and I think that's hilarious.
Massacre.
Yeah, dude, it drives me nuts. But I put on I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement. I was hearing how like 3 or 4 different kinds of punk rock came from that one song specifically, especially like US Bomb style punk. Mm-hmm. And if you had asked me where do the US Bombs get their style from, no way would I have ever said the Ramones, but I think I just was wrong. And I think that's interesting that I can, so late in my life with this stuff, I can come to the realization that something like that was the case, I put Loudmouth has incredibly simple yet effective lyrics, and then I just put ... I'm gonna beat you up, and I thought that was I don't know that song. That song's really good. 53rd and 3rd is friggin' dark but catchy as fuck. I would say that Loudmouth and 53rd and 3rd are probably the two that I like the most on the album. I don't think the album's perfect. I think it's got a lot of flaws, but I still like it a lot. Like I'd say it's a top tier record, but I think it's got some stuff that I'd like to fix on it. Namely the production, but the songwriting is really good and really strong. very little complaints, to be honest. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that record quite a bit.
I think Tommy famously had 4 hours to mix the record. So that's why
That's
the
crazy.
production sounds the way
Oh.
it does.
And isn't Let's Dance a cover?
I think so. There's a cover on
They did a
every one
lot
their
of
albums.
covers of like 50s era like bops,
Yes,
dude.
it is. It is. There's. I was thinking of another one that they have on the next album, but yeah, it is.
I think they do a lot of covers. They did like 1 or 2 per album.
I'm pretty sure there's one on every album. Yeah, there's even. On
Yeah,
the last
so-
album, there's a cover, yeah.
But I mean, overall, I think self-titled. Let me go back and look at my Spotify.
Mhm.
I was like listening to this stuff while I was driving this weekend, and like kind of like hitting the like button so I could kind of just see which ones were really, let's see this. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Out of like what 11 songs or so, I think 9 of them I like. The only 2 that I didn't really care for were Chainsaw and Havana Affair. I just don't like those songs that much. But they're not like, I wouldn't call them actively bad songs either. I just don't care for them. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the Ramones self-titled record, which I think is one of the top 5 most important records in punk rock, I would say.
Mhm.
So,
And
I mean, if you're going to go
and
top
the-
5, you have to say Ramones self-titled, and then you probably have to do like Nevermind the Bollocks, maybe like Minor Threat's first album or something. Like there's a few that are like absolute. Even if I like them or not, it doesn't matter. Like I would even say like that maybe something from the Clash is up there somewhere, and
Yeah.
I really don't care about the Clash.
Yeah, and it's fun. And so, and everything else you mentioned would have spawned off of the first Ramones record, from there.
Which is
So-
why it might be the number 1. It might be the most important record in punk rock.
Yeah, because I think it definitely can qualify as the first proper punk record, and that's because people debate that, like, where does punk actually start? Because
Dude,
they
that
want to
shit
say
is
if you want to put the New York Dolls or Iggy in the but I think just
No,
something
that's
about
punk.
this. This is more of what like it's what punk is. Like this is closer to it. Like
Well, dude, Iggy and the Stooges and MC5 and New York Dolls, that is not punk rock. That is glam. It is
Mhm.
not punk. It barely toes the line. And that's like rare in their albums. And I don't think those guys were trying to be punk rockers. And then you got
No.
bands like Death who were around for a little while before the Ramones, but they only had like 2 songs that even remotely resembled punk. So
Mhm.
you can't call these bands punk bands and you can't call these albums punk albums. The self-titled Ramones record was, in fact, okay, was there a band somewhere that did something similar before the Ramones? I don't know. Is it possible? I would say yes. Is it likely? I would even say maybe. But what we have is the information that we have. And I would say that tells us that this is the genesis, the Big Bang, dude. This is where it started.
I will
Boom.
say, someone did find a band from like Puerto Rico from around this time that sounds almost exactly like modern punk rock, and it was just
Yeah.
like, and it was like they also
Oh my
had not
goodness, what are they
heard
called?
they had not heard 70s rock, so it was just a more modern take on 50. It was the same exact concept of like the Ramones, but it sounds
Right.
even more like modern. But it's so like it's not crazy to think that you could come up on this same sort of thesis, but it's just the Ramones did it in this very specific way and caught on and where they were at and all of that stuff.
What was that damn band called? Not Los Crudos. It was somebody else. It was.
So you know what I'm referring to? Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about because they're awesome, and I would actually say that they're probably the first punk band, but they just didn't have the same reach that the Ramones had.
Yeah. But they
Oh, what
kinda-
was that? What was their freaking name? It was like a 1-word name, wasn't it? Or am I tripping?
And it might not have been Puerto Rico. It might have been like it might have been a more isolated place than I think Puerto Rico might have reached a little, but it was somewhere in Latin America or Central America for sure. And it's like again, it's just that like 50s rock, but just sped up a little bit and with a little bit of a different modern, the modern guitars of the time and that kind of stuff. From there, I think we should go into so they have that album kind of comes at the end of the CBGB run, and then they go on their tours, and then they start sort of the legendary Ramones tours. Off of that, they got a product to sell, yada yada
Right.
yada. They get to the second album pretty quick, which is Leave Home. Now, everyone, including you and I, even in the pregame for this, you sort of forget about Leave Home. It's got a lot of classic songs on it, but it does have a little bit of filler on it, more so than anything else in this initial
Yeah.
run. And I would say there's just some songs. So the initial album's credited to all 4 of them. All the songs, but on this album you start getting the different songwriting credits distributed. Some of the Joey songs on here are actually just a little like overwrought. And I Remember You, Oh I Love Her So, What's Your Game and Swallow My Pride. With that said, there's great songs in here like Glad to See You Go, Give Me Shock Treatment, Carbona Not Glue, Susan's a
Yep.
Headbanger, Pinhead.
That's a good song too. Yeah, they have some good stuff on there.
Commando, which I think is one of my old time favorite ones. You're Gonna Kill That Girl, and then another great cover this time of California Sun, which is another '50s sort of Beach Boys style song. But
Yeah, that's a good
turned
song.
into their own. So really, if they would have just shaved off a few songs on this album, it's it's every bit I think as good when you have songs like Gimme Shock Treatment, which is just a cornerstone song. And
Well,
this is the beginning of them dealing with like the mental illness and stuff, and those actual treatments, literal mental health treatments that they're bringing into song form and having fun with dark subject matter. The way we said NoFX did years later, like this is the start of
right.
kind of doing that.
Well, they could have actually absolutely done like a really, really good EP off of that, but they didn't really do a lot of that stuff back then. That wasn't how they.
No, and they put
But-
everything. They put most of their stuff out, and then they even the stuff like that they didn't put out has all been released in subsequent years. So these records are kind of long. Now, this record, is it this record or yes, this record. Eventually, they put on Sheena as a punk rocker. Eventually, made it onto this record. Now, the reason why is because you have Carbona Not Glue, another song about sniffing glue. Eventually, the record label,
So crazy.
the radio station, I think, nixed it. Like when they were still trying to get on the radio. Well, they pivot with Sheena as a punk rocker in that spot. So they go with Sheena as a punk rocker. Now the problem with that is the Sex Pistols get really big at that time, and punk rocker means you're gonna spit on people and you're gonna destroy everything in the studio and all that. So then they kind of got kicked off the radio because of the Sex Pistols by having a song that had the word punk rocker in it. So they were sort of
That's so
unfortunate
crazy.
victims, really, of the Sex Pistols. Just sort of associating them with that same type of music, even though the Ramones were a headache in their own way, but not they would have sat in the radio studio with you and given you an interview for 20 minutes in the morning.
That's crazy. Not to be like rude or anything. I'd like to switch subjects real quick, but it was Los Suecos from Peru.
Okay.
That's the band I was thinking of. That I would say that like if you had an argument, it would probably be them. But they just didn't have the reach or the effect that the Ramones had.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where that argument really goes, and I don't really think that it matters much, really. But
yeah.
But I would say that because they were doing DIY music a decade before the Ramones were a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounded sonically a lot like what we would say punk rock is. So I think at this point I would have to go look at their lyrical content and see what that was, just kind of just out of curiosity. I do think there's an argument there for them because they had whole albums that sounded like that. It wasn't like where that band Death had a couple of songs in their discography, whereas this band had whole records that sounded like that. But it was they literally have an album called let's see, where is it at? Wild Teen Punk from Peru, 1965. Like it's a compilation of stuff, but yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to bring up that name because that's who I was thinking of, and they were formed in 1964, dude. That's crazy.
Yeah, so it's a decade before this stuff, coming right off of 50s rock and just sort of evolving it, like bam, right there. That's
so. The little write-up says their use of fast tempos, screamed vocals. That's another thing that about them that I remember is that they yelled a lot more than like other bands. And aggressive riffing has led some publication to retrospectively credit them as pioneering punk rock. So I might do a video on them at some point, just because I think that it's important. They only had a couple of albums, so. But yeah, pretty crazy, man. A whole decade.
That band really didn't get credit.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so I might do a whole video on them because I love this, man. I love talking about it because none of it really matters. At the end of the day, what matters is are we doing the right thing as people? Like, are you and I doing the right thing? Are we entertaining our viewers? And are we having a good time? That's what matters. Are we doing the right thing? Are we, entertaining people? And are we having fun doing it? So does it really matter if the Ramones were the first? No, I guess not. But if anybody ever asks me, hey, man, who's the first punk band? My answer has always been the Ramones. It's always been the Ramones. They were like 4 years ahead of the Sex Pistols. Maybe like 4, like 3 years ahead of the Sex Pistols. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, we'll move forward to the third album. The final one with Tommy, Rocket to Russia, to me is kind of a perfect blend of the first two albums because it has almost no fat on it. And it's the point where the songwriting has really embraced this thing of like these misfit kids in the
Okay.
song. So you have Cretan Hop, which is like, the Cretans are kind of like the Ramones. It's a famous song, famous
Yeah.
sort of guitar riff intro. You have Sheena as a punk rocker officially released on this. We have We're a Happy Family, which is a great like dysfunctional song. The song Teenage Lobotomy, which again, more of that kind of mental health kind of stuff. I Wanna Be Well was I Wanna Be Well, wanna. Like just these songs about losing your freaking mind. Just the whole, half of an album is about that, mixed in with Rockaway Beach, which could have been like a Beach Boys song. This one is actually written by Dee Dee, and you have the cover of Surfing Bird on this one. You have
Oh, I hate this song.
Ramona, which is like a kind of a classic 50s song that they have on this. So that is some people would take that as their initial run because that's the initial Ramones. That's the first three. The first three albums are the first four members. So you see most Ramones shirt, Johnny, Joey, Dee Dee, and Tommy. Those were the Ramones for those few albums. Tommy didn't want to tour anymore. Tommy still wanted to be with the band, so he kind of wanted to come off the road. He would tell people he's having a mental breakdown. They would laugh at him, thinking that's hilarious that he was having a mental breakdown.
That's wild.
And as Dee Dee kind of famously said, like Tommy was the one who would get money and he would buy himself hamburger meat and potatoes and make himself dinner, and the rest of us would buy drugs or do whatever. He just kind of he was a normal human being,
Right.
which was unacceptable, obviously, in the Ramones. So they picked up Marky, who was just sort of in their sort of thing. Now Marky had played on major labels with a couple of metal bands, but also been in the Voidoids. Like he had toured Europe and was treated like a god just because they were in proximity to the Ramones. So he plays drums on Road to Ruin, which, again, when his audition, he just sat there next to Tommy, and Tommy would just say, okay, now you're going to play this song. Now you're going to play that song. So he had to sort of get approved by Tommy to just kind of come in to the band. And to me, Road to Ruin's a really, really strong album. It has, which is probably the closest thing they ever did have to it.
Well,
which is
I still have a couple of comments on Rocket to Russia.
Yeah, go back to it. Yeah, before we move on to Road
So you're going to be irritated by this, but I have to say this because I have very little notes on it. I put album starts off super slow. That doesn't have the ferociousness from these other albums. It's just not there. The tempo is quite a bit slower, and I feel like the songs are maybe a bit lazy. And then I put, not till the fifth song do we even get a good song. The very Beach Boys-esque Sheena is a punk rocker, but even this song, while good, isn't even close to a top 10 Ramones song in my opinion. This album is actually pretty bad. That's all that I wrote for the whole record. So when you're telling me that the album's got very little fat and it doesn't have a lot of skip, I'm going back and looking at it to see what songs I liked off of it.
Like I'm surprised you don't like Cretan Hop, like a song like Cretan.
So
Hop.
Cretan Hop is one that I missed when I was writing the notes. I think I was driving, so I had to do notes at like stoplights and shit. So like the only two that I actually liked off the whole record are Cretan Hop and Sheena's a Punk Rocker. Teenage Lobotomy I don't really care about.
Really? I was gonna say Teenage Lobotomy and We're a Happy Family. We're a happy family. We're a happy family. Me, mom, and daddy.
I think some of those things are like, I've got better versions of those songs from other bands, and and those are like super, 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 super repetitive, and a lot of Ramones stuff is like that. But again, maybe at this point I'm already like 4 records in while I'm on a drive, so I'm like kind of maybe burnt out a little bit. I think if I isolated the album, I think in the future that's what I'm gonna start doing is I'm gonna listen to one album and then give myself an hour or two break at least, and then go back into another album, because I'm really looking at this trying to be objective about it. I'm thinking maybe I just was on a little bit of a burnout, because this is where I also stopped listening to them for the day. I was like, I'm done. I can't listen to this anymore. This album I just didn't really like it much. So I will give it another listen, because I feel like I was really expecting to like it quite a bit. This is one of their top big albums.
I feel like when you look at that track listing, like those are the Ramones songs. Really, that's really a lot of.
Well, none of these songs, dude. Sheena's a Punk Rocker is the only one that I think is like a super standout. I mean, like maybe Teenage Lobotomy, maybe
like Teenage Lobotomy and We're a Happy Family. Like that blows me away.
Teenage Lobotomy, I don't like. I don't like that song. Never have. I like the lyrical content. Like I like what it's about. Like I just don't like the execution. But yeah, I don't want to like harp on it. I was just so surprised when you said it was like we were basically on opposite ends on that one.
Yeah. What did you have notes for Road to Ruin?
Not a ton. Actually, you know what? Actually, yeah, I have some notes on this one. Okay, maybe you'll like this better. I don't know. On Road to Ruin, I said it just starts off. Uh, this one starts off strong, better than self-titled in my opinion. Sonically, the sound is thicker, better guitar tone. I guess it's just the production had more of a budget. Maybe everything about the sound is improved. Now the songs, that's a different conversation. People like songs off the first album better, I'd imagine. I think that I do. Uh, doesn't come close to a departure from their typical sound. Wait, don't come close. Sorry. Is a departure from a typical sound. It's a good song. I like them mixing it up a little bit. Heavy Beach Boys and all their music, but this one specifically, I love the vocal melody in that song. I Don't Want You is a great follow up to that one. And then I put Damn Needles and Pins is so good. Great lyrically, an old school tambourine. I like it. Uh, I'm Against It is a very punk rock jam. Reminds me of Cool to Hate by The Offspring. I Want to Be Sedated, the first Ramon song I ever heard that I knew was a Ramon song, that I knew was also punk. And then it's got the claps in there. I love the hand claps. And I said, is there any chance that this is where Bad Brains got their name from?
Yep.
I have no idea. Is it?
Song,
Okay.
Yeah, bad brain. Yeah, that was where they got the from.
And then the last thing I wrote down, or two things, I guess, is It's a Long Way Back has some sort of Weezer in it. It's like we know how influential these bands are, but hearing direct references to other bands from their songs is just kind of awesome. And then I Just Want to Have Something to Do is one of my favorite Ramon songs is very Turbo Negro-esque.
I wish they could have just like got on whatever they had on this album and like projected it to their whole career, because a lot of the things you're saying, one, I don't think they ever sounded better than they sounded on this particular
I agree.
album. And part of it is you had the inflection of a new a higher quality drummer again. Like I think that really plays into the thickness of the sound. But then
Right.
you also have the former drummer strictly producing, so someone that is very aware of this sound but is been like he's not on the
Yep.
road with them anymore and stuff like that. So it's almost like when Brett leaves Bad Religion but then still produces almost maybe better music with them. It's kind of that. And then you just have like Needles and Pins, which is a Sonny Bono cover. They're taking from all this.
Oh,
stuff and-
really?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
like I wanted everything. Like this is them. I think if they wouldn't have gone to End of the Century right here, maybe made another one of these. I don't know like what that could have done. But this era was like so perfect, and I think that's why like Marky gets kind of lumped in with the original Ramones, because this album is almost that era to like perfection. I just kind of wish the next album didn't happen. That way this could be preserved a little more. And you think like graphically too, this is the album cover was really well received. A lot of people have mocked it up over the years. A lot of those Ramones core
Is that the one with the
use that.
drawing?
Yeah, and it's like yellow.
Yeah.
It's like even the Interrupters recently did like a EP or something, and it was
Oh, really?
it was like based off of that, that design and stuff, the cartoon. I have a puzzle of it somewhere that I put together that's pretty cool, because it's like that. They were like big comic book nerds and that kind of stuff too, so they were always had their self photos on the album, and this is the first time that they're actually painted on the album, and they're there with like New York City. So they start art direction, as we talked about, really important with this band, from the t-shirt to every the music was only part of what they really sold.
Right. Man, you said Interrupters put out a new EP?
No, this was a few years ago.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Road to Perfection or something like that they called it, and
Huh.
it was a mock-up of them, but with that, and like maybe one of the maybe when they did that thing in San Diego, like the radio station thing or something like that.
Oh, I have seen this.
It was a mock-up of that cover, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I've seen this. Yeah, that's awesome.
Mhm.
It does look like it's that's really great actually.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do think that my favorite two albums are like the bookends of their big four.
Mhm.
The first one and the fourth one, I like them a lot.
Yeah, I would agree with. I mean, I like Rocket to Russia plenty too, more than you, but I think Road to Ruin is better. And even if I might like the songs on Rocket to Russia better, I would rather listen to Road to Ruin. Road to Ruin's a good.
It
like,
does sound.
If I don't want to listen to the first Ramones and I don't want to listen to the second half from that first batch, if I just need to go to one, Road to Ruin is just the one. I kind of put it in. Again, Sedated got bigger as the years went on, when it would be in like movie soundtracks and that kind of stuff. It did have a video tied to it pretty early on. The Ramones did get on MTV initially, like in that early run of MTV, and then they just kind of got squeezed out of MTV because they were just a little bit older, obviously, than all the other bands that were on there by the time
Yeah.
the 80s came by. So the Ramones go through the 70s. They kind of create punk, but it's like the Clash and the Pistols and all this stuff kind of comes in, burns out, fades away. The Ramones still kind of remained. They never got as high as like the Clash and the Pistols did in that era, so there was never further to fall. And then they go into the '80s with end of the century, where, as I said, they tried to sell out and failed miserably at selling out. It was very Ramones-ish.
So, what are your favorite Ramones songs? Do you have any? Do you have some that are just like your favorites?
Yeah, it's probably Pinhead is like my old time favorite.
Oh, okay.
Ramones song. Probably like go with Pinhead, Pet Cemetery.
I love that song.
Yeah,
Pet Cemetery. It's really good.
And that one and Bonzo Goes to Pittsburgh. I would say those are my 3 favorite Ramones songs.
Mine are probably I Just Want to Have Something to Do. I really, really love I still like Blitzkrieg Bop because it's a song that no matter where I'm at, if it comes on, I dance around and sing to it. And so like it's been played to death, I know that, but I don't care. I like that song a lot. And then let's see, probably maybe Sheena's a punk rocker. I just like that. That's another one that I can hum that whole damn song. I Want to Be Sedated is pretty iconic for me. That might be, you know what? That might be my third because that's the one when like I said, I first heard it. I knew it was punk. I knew it was the Ramones, and I knew what it was, and I appreciated it for that. And that one really helped propel me into the things that I was going to love in the future. It's one of the earlier punk songs that I ever heard. And I think I knew it was punk because I was told it was punk because I liked it before I knew what punk was. And somebody was like, "Oh yeah, this is like punk rock. You like that, huh?" And I was like, sure." It was this old dude I used to hang out with, and I got a lot of music stuff from that guy. He listened to a lot of metal mostly, but he liked the Ramones and he liked the Sex Pistols. And I remember stealing those CDs from him too. I stole the Ramones CD from him, and I stole the Sex Pistols CD from him, and I stole one more. Can't remember what the other one was, but I took 3 CDs from him and never gave them back to him. So, fuck you. But yeah, dude, Ramones, man. Overall, I think an absolutely fantastic band. I'm glad I got to go dive back into their discography because I'll be honest, man, I don't really go listen to them a whole lot. I added a bunch of songs to the Punk Rock Review playlist on Spotify so that it would just get in my rotation because I think that's a necessary thing I need to have. You okay?
Yeah, I had an intruder in here making sure they weren't tripping over the.
Okay, cool. So I think I need to have more time with those songs in my ears, man. I think it's funny because I'll listen to stuff that's heavily influenced by these other bands, but I don't ever go back to the other bands. So yeah, man, I think this is a great talk.
And it's funny because the Ramones hit so many different things that turns out, like, if you're a fan of either one of our channels, whatever you're into, there's some Ramones connection to it, like somewhere. Whether it's the poppy stuff,
for
whether
sure.
it's hardcore stuff, whether it's indie stuff, whether it's Lemmy's favorite band was the Ramones.
That's so
Motorhead
crazy.
has a song called Ramones because Lemmy's favorite band was the Ramones.
Dude, is that the song the Casualties sing, or is that their song?
No, that's their song, their tribute.
That's so crazy. There's 2 bands that have a song called Ramones.
Yeah, and they have the Casualties have. Yeah, Made in NYC, right? Is it a song called Made in NYC? Or
no, it's called RAMONES.
Okay, then that would be a cover of the Ramones, of the Motorhead Ramones song. But then the Casualties also have Made in NYC, which is dedicated to the Ramones. Dedicated to when Joey died. 3-chord wonders, Made in NYC. Gabba gabba, hey, punk is here to stay.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. That's so, dude, I love the Casualties, man. I'm sorry, but that band's so good.
Oh, it's great. It's great. If you ever want to hear all these songs, though, in weird form, one of the ways I learned a little bit of Ramones was when I was coming up in the early 2000s. Rob Zombie put out We're a Happy Family, and it was just a bunch of random bands doing tributes to the Ramones. So you have like Marilyn Manson doing the Ramones. You have Garbage doing the Ramones.
That
you
is
have Green
weird.
Day doing the Ramones. You have U2 doing the Ramones. You have Ministry doing the Ramones. You have all these bands doing the Nine Inch Nails doing the Ramones, and it really shows how those songs got translated into different formats and the scope of their influence, which is just, again, like there's songs that Bruce Springsteen wrote that he didn't want to use that he thought the Ramones would be better at, and vice versa. Like there's one of the Springsteen hits that I think was written for the Ramones and vice versa. And it's like,
that's so weird.
It's crazy. And like, so Bono talked about it, like their big record break for U2 is like they had to play they played a bunch of Ramones songs because they knew the record execs would like the Ramones songs that they played. And so
that's crazy.
That was their foot in the door. It's just insane. And again, and they kind of benefited off of none of it. It's insane. They benefited off of legacy. They didn't benefit. Like Marky gets the benefit, CJ gets the benefit, Linda gets the benefit, Mickey Lay gets the benefit, but like the core 4 Really didn't. That's
But
there's
that's-
your punk
that's-
rock tragedy right there.
I was gonna say that's kind of how it goes for punk rock, though, man. Like you don't get oftentimes. I mean, look at you even have stuff like Sid Vicious and Sex Pistols, bro. Just like, okay, cool, that guy's gone, and he really was the one that propelled that look, that
Yeah.
style. He couldn't play for shit, but it didn't really matter. He was cooler than cool, you know.
And I think the Ramones are the worst of both worlds because they got they still had to go through like a 15-year road dog career, but not, like at least
Right.
the Pistols burned out, you know, and have to get
Right.
to this status. Like the Ramones just had to go through their shitty career and not be famous until they died. And now there's literal in Germany, there's like a Ramones museum that exists, you know, in dedication to them, and still to this day in Central America, they are just massive. There's like Ramones music on commercial. Like they are thought of as like the Beatles in parts of like South America, and
That's
they just didn't hit it big in America, which is ironic because their identity is so much of an American band. Like
right,
their
dude, for
seal
real.
looks like the presidential seal, and they're a band with a baseball bat and a leather jacket and the New York Yankee. Like they sort of scream Americana. But it's almost like it was an exported Americana because in America they're touring with these bands that like they're 3 generations away from influencing in the early 90s they're opening for. And then they play soccer stadiums in Argentina. Like, how does that make any sense?
Dude, I kind of can't wait to do a Los Suecos video now because I want to learn more about that band, just to kind of see
Like what it?
what the deal is with that. How did they not get any recognition, and how can we link them to the Ramones? Kind of, I don't know that you can actually because they were from different parts of the world at a time where there was obviously no internet. So I mean, there was no.
Well,
So I don't know.
I think that's
Cool
why,
conversation.
that's part of why, I've heard some of the theorizing of the Ramones being good in Latin America is they went through a lot of political upheaval, like in the 80s and stuff like that. So like alienation music was really appealing to like that part of the country, and like in the 70s, 70s New York is that alienation music, and I would assume that like it's probably a similar, even if there's not influence directly from something, that similar sort of angst and that kind of stuff that sort of bubbles up, and you wonder like how do you get to that place, because like the angst that the Sex Pistols had was very political and stuff, but it was in a different style. It was differently like oriented because and it just makes sense. You live in a different area, you're going to be inspired by different things and influenced by different things. And the Ramones are politically on different sides of the aisle within the band.
Dude,
so they do have political songs.
within the band, dude, it's so crazy.
So like, they do Bonzo Goes to Bitburg, which is like this takedown of Reagan, which should be the easiest thing for an 80s punk band to do, a takedown of Reagan. You have like Johnny, a Reagan man, very reluctant as they make this song, you know what I mean? It's just, and they do like the Rock the Vote because it was like nonpartisan. And even then they got into an argument when they were at the MTV Rock the Vote thing. Like it's just,
Yep.
Ramones,
That is
man.
so wild. So, okay. Before we get out of here tonight, I got a question. I can't remember, what is your stance on The Clash? Is that a band you really like?
No, I'm with you. I appreciate what they influenced, but like of the big 3, they're the one I just don't really get down with.
So do you want to do an episode on them?
Not particularly. Like I would,
Really?
I'd like to learn. I would do I would watch a doc with you, and then we would go off that doc maybe, but not in this.
Well,
style.
so like, okay. So like, why don't we kind of do that then? But do it in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Let's do, okay. So next week we're going to do, since it's only a 6-day break, because we're going to do it on Monday.
Yeah.
Let's do, what was our favorite Warped Tour year? It's something we should be able to easily do.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying, bro?
Yeah,
like I'm ready to talk some
already-
Warped Tour.
Yeah. There we go.
So let's do, what's our favorite Warped Tour year next week,
Yeah, on Monday.
and then let's do the following week. Or do you even want to do maybe like another one in between, and then do the Clash in like 3 weeks, so it gives us some time to find a couple of docs to watch.
Yeah, and let's make sure we're watching the same docs, just so we're sort of going off of that, because this is not really like a one, like two different knowledges. We'll bring a lot of the same knowledge, because I know like their general story, but like I can't, like the way I could do 3 hours on the Ramones, I could do like 20 minutes on the Clash. You know what I mean?
So that's what I was thinking, is I want to watch a little bit of the documentaries. I'm going to listen to some of the music because I just have been talking about them a lot with people, and I know I don't really like it that much, but I think I should dive into it and listen to some of it and maybe get a different point of view to some degree. If you want to listen to some of it in the next couple of weeks, I would appreciate that. I know, because I know it's not something that both of us want to just dive into, but I think that makes for good content.
I feel like I should, though. Like
that's kind of what that's kind of my point.
Like it is my biggest blind spot. All this punk history I know,
dude.
I just have I have that of that band, and that's like
we're on the same wavelength, man. We're on the same wavelength. I think that we just kind of owe it to the genre and owe it to our viewers, because they like that band. We're not. We're the odd ones, man. We're the ones that are like the weird guys.
We got Rancid, and we were like, we're good.
Right. So I'll figure out another one for the following week, and then so in 3 weeks from now, so I guess April basically, we'll do the Clash. So we'll do favorite Warped Tour lineup next week. The following week we'll do something, and then the week after that we'll do the Clash. I'll look up some stuff. I'll put a poll up, see, hey, what Clash stuff should I watch, and then I'll send that information to you.
Well, yeah, audience, put that in the comment section. Like, kind of, we've got to source you guys for this little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So let us know what Clash stuff we need to watch, because I don't think it's going to change my mind, and I'm going to suddenly be like this big Clash fan. But I was hanging out with Chris Klink, and he was like, "Nah, bro, you're wrong, dude. The Clash is very punk rock, and they're amazing and blah blah blah." And I was just like, I don't know, man. And so I thought, you know what, I like Chris enough to give this another shot. So what's a better way to do it than to talk with you, who I know we at least agreed to some degree on that band. So
yeah, and I'm going to I've never been a Clash hater, other than people annoy me with the Clash. I've never.
Well, that's kind of how I am. I don't really care. I don't talk about it a lot, but when it gets brought up, it's always like, oh, they're the greatest thing ever, and I'm like, I just don't get it, man.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. I don't get it. I'm fucking retarded.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, before we get into it, the Ramones are a big part of that for me, because it's like, oh no, I'll just whatever it is, the Ramones probably did it better, is always how I've sort of had the attitude of with that. So I want to open my mind a little bit more to it, which is, it's gonna be
me
fun.
too. Well, they have a much broader sound than anything that we've talked about from that era.
And it's just a bigger career too, a more expansive,
if there's anything about them that is important, I would say, is that they brought in the idea of, we can be this style of band, but put this kind of stuff in it too. Which is what Rancid does really well. So,
and very influential. Which this is gonna be fun.
Yeah, awesome, man. So in 3 weeks, Clash. Next week, Warped Tour. Following week, we don't quite know yet.
Right.
So, hell yeah, man. Anything else you want to talk about before we go?
No, just when you see me on here next time, my voice will be shot from singing along with the Descendants, Adolescents, and Circle Jerks. So,
dude, I can't wait for that show, man.
In between next time, it'll be a weird time capsule where I'll be in between.
I was gonna say it won't be next time, but it'll be the following time, because next Monday is when we're doing the next show.
Yeah.
Wait, when is your show?
Mine's this coming Saturday.
Oh, this coming Saturday,
yeah.
And then mine is the following week.
Yours is like Tuesday. Yours is a week
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, man, I thought yours was the following Saturday after that. So okay, yeah, yours is coming up quick.
Yeah.
Oh,
so I'll be right.
Yeah, you gotta let me know how it is, man. That's awesome.
So it'll be fun. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about Warped Tour. It's gonna be a fun, less serious, dense show than what we had.
Yeah, no. Next week will be a lot of fun, because I already know what I'm talking about for the most part. So, dude, Rob, it's always a pleasure, brother. If you need something from me, let me know. Everybody out there, please go check out the Punk Aughts. Go listen to the Ramones. Go listen to the Clash. Go listen to some Warped Tour bands, so you can join us in these conversations, man. If you're on Spotify, thank you so very much for checking out this podcast. We work really hard at making this entertaining for everybody, and perfect we are not, but we put effort in. So I love you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.